Project Sapient is a podcast meant to engage our brothers and sisters in the law enforcement and military communities in conversations that we all know we need to have. All opinions you hear are our own, and they are protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. They are in no way reflect or are meant to reflect the opinion of any specific agency, officer, or service member. Some opinions may be controversial. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy. All right, everyone. Project Sapient back. I don't have Jake again. He's out hunting elk. So hopefully he's enjoying himself. I know he sent us a text, me and the other head of the Cerberus, Gabe, that his daughter almost got that elk that she's wanted to get, but it eluded her. It's like watching Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote with those two. But today is going to be another fantastic episode. And, you know, this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for our supporters, listeners, everybody that shares our podcast. I mean, we grow through word of mouth more than anything else. And same thing with Instagram and everything. And, you know, especially one of our biggest sponsor supporters, AAA Police Supply. Just head over there, AAAPoliceSupply.com, and make sure you buy whatever you want, you know, anything police related for your job, any duty gear, off-duty gear, whatever you want. They have it, and use the code HYBRID10 and get 10% off your entire order. So like I said, today, great episode. I actually came across this Instagram profile when I'm scrolling through the interwebs and various things pop up on my feed, and kind of got to look at this Instagram page called Survive Policing, and really like everything. His name is JT who runs it. JT puts out there, because it's all the stuff that I've been talking about for the years. You know, whether it's writing about it in Havoc Journal or any other media platform, Epoch Times, same thing. All my publishing has to do with, you know, essentially how to survive policing, you know, in terms of the actual dedication and work it takes, both on and off duty. You know, it's a career, it's a craft, and it's something that really you need if you're looking into the profession to take seriously. And part of it is, I'm not saying to change your entire identity into just policing, but it's not actually, just like yesterday I was working with one of my SWAT teammates. It's not like a job you do at Target, you know, 9 to 5 or whatever. It's a lot different. So without further delay, let's bring on JT. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no. Thanks for coming on, man. And like I said, it's been a wild ride for us for the past, I'd say, I mean, I've been a cop almost 20 years, and it seems every year the pendulum either goes one way or the other, and it's just interesting to really see how the profession just keeps getting beat down over and over and over again. And you know, like I said, I like what you post. I like what you put out, the realities of the job and what it takes to be in the job. And you know, I'm gonna start back on kind of, you know, where you came from, how you started in the profession, and what led up to Survive Police. And so, JT, by all means, go right ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I mean, my journey kind of started, we were just talking about a little bit about, you know, September 11th. And when 9/11 happened, I was just starting 10th grade. And again, I kind of look back at that as like the first real significant event that I kind of witnessed as a teenager that kind of opened my eyes to what the world is about. But, you know, my grandfather was a police officer for essentially his entire life. He spent 27 years in Washington, D.C. as a police officer, ended up leaving. You know, he was working back in the 50s, 60s, 70s Had a lot of significant incidents happen back then, with the race riots. And he ended up leaving law enforcement, bought a farm, and became a cattle rancher for about 8 years, and then ended up going back to law enforcement, became a chief of police down in a small town in Virginia for another 8 years or so. So growing up, again, I didn't really have any, I didn't really think I'd be in law enforcement, but once I started getting to that age, 17, 18 years old, I didn't really know what to do. But the one thing I knew was I saw my grandfather living pretty well for a lot of years, and he certainly worked for it. But, it was one of those things that probably a lot of us look at when we're looking at law enforcement is like the job security, right? And, my grandfather, he's been retired for many, many years, he's still alive, just turned 97 last month, and still kicking. But, I just I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, ended up going to college, was going to study and try to do something in business. That was kind of one of my passions, but again, had no idea what to do. And so I graduated high school in 2004, kind of right in the heart of when, the last 20 years of war were kind of kicking off. And honestly, at that point, I hated college. I was absolutely bored out of my mind, and I just wanted to kind of belong to something. So I ended up going in the military. I went the Air Force route for a couple of different reasons. One, I get seasick, so the Navy was kind of out, even though all of my family went through the Navy. The Marine Corps was actually my first pick, and I had some interesting experiences with a recruiter and some guys that I kind of met that honestly, it just kind of turned me off. In the Air Force, one of the things that they kind of offered was, I had finished almost 2 years in college, and one of the things that my parents were very emphasized highly was finishing, a college degree. And the Air Force kind of gave me that opportunity to say, hey, like they were the one branch that said, hey, if you want to do it, you can do it. So ended up enlisting when I was 20 years old. Spent 4 years active duty in the Air Force, pretty insignificant kind of time, just served my duty, got out, and I was a military police officer in the Air Force. And then I got out, wanted to go into civilian law enforcement. That was my whole goal. Ended up going to the police academy in 2011. Spent 10 years with a large county agency in the state of Maryland. Worked patrol, was a field training officer pretty early on. Got selected for 2 different specialized units. One was a uniform street crimes unit. The next was a plainclothes surveillance unit. And ended up going through quite a bit of personal trauma, family issues, and ended up finding my way out of law enforcement back in 2021. Again, following kind of George Floyd, 2020, personal things, and then getting an opportunity outside of law enforcement that I just felt like I couldn't pass up. So I've been in the private sector ever since. I've dabbled in the idea of going back to law enforcement. Again, I have close relationships with, still to this day, working with law enforcement. But, back in 2021, based on kind of a lot of the things that I saw near the end of my career, a lot of the things that I had dealt with personally, I knew I wanted to give back somehow to the community. I knew that some of the things that I was told coming in, I just found were just bullshit. There was a lot of cold hard truths that I learned over my career that I felt like wasn't being shared. And so Survive Policing honestly was just kind of a way to somehow give back to the community. I didn't really know what that meant, but at the same time, I was also learning a lot about marketing. Again, like back to my kind of passion for business back when I was younger. I always had this passion for entrepreneurship, and I wanted to kind of start a business one day, whatever it was. I didn't know what to do, but near the end of my police career, I also started kind of stumbled into the world of digital marketing and social media and stuff like that. And I said, I actually started doing some freelance work for clients, and I was never big into social media, but I knew that at the time, like I had to kind of understand it to really make this something significant on the side. And so I started an Instagram account, called it Survive Policing kind of on a whim, and just started posting. And for about the first year or so, it just was posting honestly like kind of generic type of stuff. And soon after, I started getting a lot of messages from people, obviously like active police officers that were just sharing their experiences, kind of asking me questions, right? I was kind of like a faceless Instagram account, but they're coming to me asking me questions and kind of sharing their concerns and like telling me kind of the types, the bullshit that they're seeing on the job and how to deal with it, right? And so I realized that whatever I was kind of posting was resonating with people. And so then I just kind of really went out there and started posting as raw thoughts as I could, right? And the messages just I don't want to exaggerate, but like I would get hundreds of messages. And at the time, I maybe had, I don't know, a couple thousand followers, but it was resonating. And I think what resonated most was I was saying things that I think a lot of people thought, but just couldn't say. Again, whether it was because of backlash from their own agency, just not wanting to put a spotlight on themselves, completely understandable. And now, I'm kind of on the other side in the private sector at that point, and I can say these things. And so I just kind of leaned into that. And once I kind of realized that like what I was saying and my own thoughts and kind of beliefs, although I think somewhat unique, obviously, I think we all have unique experiences and thoughts on things. Something about it was clicking with people. And so I just leaned in and kept going, posting every day. And, we're at over 3 years now with Survive Policing. It's been growing, have added some training components. And then also, was fortunate enough to join the Police Post team back in December at Police Post on Instagram, probably the biggest law enforcement Instagram page there is. Yeah. And to join their team and kind of, we're growing there too. So that's kind of been my journey. Again, really just saw that the community was sharing a lot of the same thoughts and experiences that I saw. And I really wanted to do my part to kind of peel that blindfold off of people, especially young officers and officers that may be thinking about getting into law enforcement, and not deter anybody. Because again, I love law enforcement. I've told people before, what I got to do in law enforcement, I don't think I'll ever do anything as fun as that. But there's realities of it, and there's sacrifices that are made no matter who you are and how long you're in it. And we need to talk about those. I think similar to the military, right? Like if we don't have that open discussion with each other, no one's going to do it for us. The leadership's not going to do it. Society's not going to do it. Politicians aren't going to do it. We have to do it for ourselves and for each other.
Yeah, I've always said kind of one of the biggest mistakes law enforcement does, administration does, is they don't talk about these things. They don't talk about, let's say, for example, an excessive use of force, right? Yes, bad all day long, whatever. But what they don't mention is that same officer in that same day dealt with an infant death, right? Yet he still had to go out there, do the job, and, pull the car over, a random stop sign violation, whatever it might be. Yet that trauma, right, that he just dealt with was never addressed, right? Was never like, hey, dude, take a couple hours, go relax, like, stay in the station, whatever, whatever you want to do. But that's what they don't talk about when something goes wrong, right? And now I'm not defending every officer and all that. Like, like I get it. There's always bad apples in every profession. That is well known. Whether you could have the best like the doctors, you got your good and bad. Like every profession has its good and bad. But I always look at it as, this dude had a really bad day, yet you kept pounding him, call after call after call. And you're talking like I come, where I work is a pretty good size, medium city, size city in Massachusetts. And, it's just constantly like all kinds of stuff. Right. And again, like I said, the administration does not talk about those things enough. Where, yes, my officers deal with these types of things all the time. And, advocating for, hiring a lot more police officers. That way we're able to, give a cop a week off if needed, without having them to burn their vacation time, sick time, whatever it might be. I know I talked to Bakersfield PD. I went out there, helped train them. And, one of the great things that they do is in their CAD system, it's like an automated thing, an AI thing, where if an officer sees or deals with one too many traumatic events, they get quote unquote flagged, and not bad, but flagged. And that name gets brought up to the administration like, hey, you might want to check in on this guy, which I think is a fantastic idea,
It's super interesting.
That I've never heard of that. That's the first I've heard of an agency that does that. But not enough do that though. And it's one of those things, like I said, whether it's the administration all the way up to, and most of my blame, I always say, is the politicians. Right. It's always the politicians that are the ones that drive the divide in the community. And, I'm sure you've seen it in your neck of the woods when you were on the job, and even still to this day, you still see it, and the messages that you get. I mean, I get messages, same thing.
Mhm.
And a couple of the posts that I've read that you've written, again, I was like, yeah, that's like 100% true.
Yeah.
Like, the whole idea behind training, like, you know, uh, because the department's not going to do it for us, right?
Mhm.
That's why we got to go seek out good training. And I don't know what it was like for you, you know, you're in service or whatever that you ended up having to do. I mean, what was it like in Maryland when you went to these types of trainings? Did you feel like you were really getting anything out of it, or was it a check the box type training?
Yeah, it's so many great points. I mean, again, just going back to your original point about the difficulty of the job itself, like I always said that, like, if I ever wrote a book about the job, I would probably title it "Impossible Perfection," because
Yeah.
that's kind of the phrase I was like, yeah, like, again, we're, as police officers, you're expected to be perfect, and it's impossible to be perfect. It's just not, it's a great point about just, I wish as a profession we tried out more things like you were just talking about, like flagging. Like, look, if you've experienced, 4 traumatic incidents today, like, maybe we should give you a break, right? I think that's also something we talk a lot about. Supervisors, their role is just huge, right? And how do we put supervisors? How do we give them the training to be able to look at their officers and say, hey, man, like, come to the station, like, let's have a talk, sit down, like, take your shit off, sit here, like, maybe you need to go home, like, let's just sit here and take a breath, right? But in terms of training, I always felt that, and I think I was fortunate. The agency I was with actually had some very good in-house training. um, in service was in service, right? It's probably it was probably similar to any in service that you go to. And of course, the problem with, there's a lot of problems with our approach to training in law enforcement. I think one is, law enforcement is its own discipline. And I think what we've seen, particularly over the last 20 years, is, we have a lot of military, a lot of veterans coming out that get into the training space, which is great, right? They're, the one of the problems is that, again, I think there's not a lot of, we don't respect the law enforcement profession as its own discipline enough. There's obviously certain things that we can take from the military, from other disciplines, but, you know, working the road, going out on the street, doing the job, you know, roadside investigations, street side investigations, looking for bad guys, like, that's its own thing. And we can take tactics from the military. We can take strategies and different lessons from the military or other, professions. But again, we have to develop law enforcement as its own discipline. And I feel like that's where we fail a lot. Um, you know, I also think that by far the best training that cops can get is actually doing the work, doing cop work, being on the street. There is no substitute for that. You go through the police academy, and again, I think we all accept the fact that the police academy can provide you a foundation for what the job is about. And again, there's certain things that in the police academy we can actually learn really well, right? We can be effective in teaching report writing, and case law and constitutional law, but there is no substitute for getting out there. And then we transition to field training, right? And field training, in my experience, was I think we did 16 weeks of field training, which is pretty, I feel like a good amount of time, but honestly, it's probably not enough. And the level of field trainers out there is questionable, for some legitimate reasons, right? Like, I was essentially voluntold to be a field trainer 3 years on with my department. Now, luckily, I had some experience and, military experience, some law enforcement experience. I had a lot of life experience too. So I think I ended up being a pretty good field trainer. And I was also passionate about it, which is important. But, if we're sending guys out that have been on 1, 2, 3 years to then train the next crop of guys, like, that's just not going to work. It's not sustainable. So that's something that we have to look at. So how do we do that? Do we keep people in FTO for 6 months, a year? Like, probably in a perfect world, that probably would make sense. The challenge with that is just logistics, but also the fact that, like, again, if you're going to be riding solo, which, when I was on patrol, we rode solo. you have to get out there and do it. It's the only way to
Yeah.
learn. It's the only way to develop that intuition, the decision making, just the ability to go out there and actually handle the day to day of the job.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that on my department that I actually was thinking about recently that I thought was a benefit was we had kind of overlapping shifts. So one day a week, we had one day where I think for like, it was broken up into like 2 months. So for 2 months, we were like the training shift for one day a week. So we could, in theory, go out there and just spend the day doing training, team training, whatever it was. Sometimes catch up on casework. But that gave us a day to like, all right, this is our day to kind of come together and work on whatever it is that we need to work on. And then, every 2 months that would kind of flip flop. Again, not logistically possible in a lot of agencies, but also I think something like that is beneficial. 2 days of in-service a year is not sufficient in any way whatsoever. I also, on the other hand, again, I think when we get a lot of the law enforcement profession gets a lot of feedback from the military side, right? And I think I've heard this a few times from like Jocko, where he's talked about the cops need to be training like 50% of the time. Well, that's completely impractical, and it's all respect to him, but that's just a complete lack of understanding of what the profession is. And also, again, maybe the most important point is a lack of understanding of what, again, back to the point of the best training you can get as a cop is doing the cop work. It's not going to the academy and clearing rooms all day. Like, that's great. But if you're going to be great at the things we talk about, the avoiding the excessive use of force, dealing with the traumatic events back to back to back, going out there and still being effective, looking for bad guys, locking them up, doing it in a way that's legally effective and efficient, the only way to do that is on the road and on the street. So then where does that get us, right? Well, I think it's two things. One, resources. Like, taking away money from law enforcement agencies is the worst thing you can do, because that means you're not hiring enough people that can then work the road, so other people then can go spend their more time training, right? Whether it's one day a week, 2 days a week. Hey, if every cop was able to train half their week, we'd have a whole different profession, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely, I
But
agree.
find one agency in America that can handle that, and I'll buy you a drink, because it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then, and one of the, also one of the reasons I started Survive Policing and us at Police Post have really been emphasizing what we can do in terms of the training side is, following, we talked about earlier, like how things change so often, the ups and downs, right? And you talk to guys that worked in the 90s, and they talk about Rodney King. And then, out here in Maryland, we obviously had Michael Brown. And then I think it was 2 years later out here in Maryland, we had Freddie Gray. And Freddie Gray happened. And I remember I was actually training a rookie, and we came to work and we were sitting there. You're watching kind of the riots unfold on our MDT, like sitting there at work and just being like, that's going on, 30, 40 miles north of us. And we're just like, damn. And from that moment, things changed. And then when George Floyd happened, things exponentially changed even greater, right? So what happened then, and I'm sure some guys that left after that too, was they're just like, I'm done, and when guys leave earlier than they either wanted to or expected to, their experience goes with them. That knowledge is gone.
Yeah.
So, the big question is, how do we retain that experience and that knowledge? Because there's no book that we can give the cops to say, hey, like, this is what you need to learn, right? You have to have that experience. And so much of it is just indescribable in terms of how, veteran, when we talk about like a rookie cop, right? Like, it's almost, they can't even see straight because there's so much going on, right? Whereas if you compare that to a veteran officer who can actively observe everything around him, pick out the people that are actually suspicious, be able to articulate that when they go to a report and say, hey, this is why I stopped that person, and have the reputation or the experience to make that credible, right? Those are the things that just can't be taught in a police academy. They can't be taught by going to the range once a week. Like, those are things that you have to teach. And so maybe I'm also almost talking myself into the idea of like having a kind of a long-term field training program where it's like, once a week your supervisor rides with you. You know what I mean? Like, again, certain idea. There's no easy answer. I think at the end of the day, it's about retaining great officers and putting people in a position to learn from them, but also understanding, like, when we talk about, oh, well, cops need more training. Well, most people that say that don't know exactly what that means. They think that, you ask them further follow-up questions, they don't actually know what type of training they need. And I think that's extremely important to note. There's a lot of things, just, a lot of the things that I talk about because I'm really passionate about it is, behavior assessments, right? Like assessing behavior, understanding, when the whole job is kind of based on this idea of reasonable suspicion, right? Most people, there's a great video recently, I don't know if you saw it, but great as in really bad. But the officer gets out, and the two officers get out, and they stop a father and a son who are walking. I think it's 5:30 in the morning, and the officer gets out and stops them, and the father's like, why are you stopping me? And there's kind of this back and forth about the officer saying, well, it's you're out here walking really early, it's suspicious. And the father's like, well, why is that suspicious? I think he also mentions, like, his son has autism, which, if anyone has any experience with that, there's good reasons why you would take that child out before the sun comes up, before a lot of activity is going on, to have that walk. And you kind of hear, like, the officer going through his mind of, like, yeah, well, it's not suspicious, well, it's kind of weird though. And you can even see, like, he's already lost because he's not unable to formulate and articulate in his own mind why this is suspicious. He's just jumping out and saying, hey, like, stop here. And the whole situation goes away that it shouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
Those are basics, right? The basics of reasonable, articulable suspicion. It's so basic. You probably learn it in day one of the academy, but we're at a point where we have officers out there that can't tell you what suspicion means, and they can't tell you what observations they're seeing and articulating them to say, hey, like, this is why this is suspicious. And those are, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all we do as cops. And going back to, like, the difference between a rookie officer and an experienced officer, that's something that you learn and they can do without thinking about it. But we have to, like, start that process way earlier and get cops to the point where, like, they know what suspicious behavior is. So when they make that stop and things go wrong, or things escalate to the point where force is used, they can articulate it, and they can articulate it in a way that's credible and is substantiated, not just saying, hey, I got out, I thought this person, it was odd that they were walking around the alleyway. Well, why? And then what happened? Well, we threw him on the ground because he wouldn't give us his ID. All right, well, now you have to explain yourself. And if you can't explain yourself, you've lost already.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's funny you say that. When I was at FTO, now I'm a sergeant on my PD. I've been a sergeant for like 3 years now. So I mean, I spent most of my time patrol, plainclothes, detectives, federal task force with the DEA. So, when I went back to the PD after I did my stint with DEA, it became a sergeant and everything. And I really got to see how, like you said, unable to really articulate why they did what they did, right?
Yeah.
And so, without giving too many specifics, recently we came, dealt with the situation. By the time I showed up, the officers were pat for skin, people, whatever. It was like an attempted B&E to a motor vehicle type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I was good with it all. Like, oh, okay, they're doing their thing and just making sure the guys are good to go and all that. And, go back and, so I, hey, what's going on? So what is it that you had? And they had it, but they weren't able to say it, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, they had all the behaviors, like they just couldn't put it together on paper. And that's, like you said, the veteran officer is able to do that really easily, where they're like, oh yeah. And these observations a veteran officer makes in split seconds, like boom, 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 sees all that. So going back when I was a FTO, I used to make officers, the recruits, go and walk the city center. And I told them, I want you to talk to every single individual in the center. Like, I don't care who. I was like, is there any law that prevents you from talking to anybody? Like, no. I'm like, then go talk. I'd park the cruiser and I'd make them walk, walk and talk, just to get them used to seeing the behaviors of what a normal conversation looks like, and what somebody who is suspicious, has that you're suspicious of them, how they react when you talk to them, because again, you create that baseline. Okay, this is what a normal human does when I'm talking to them, just shooting the shit with them. Oh,
Yeah.
but this guy, when I get there and he matches a description of whatever, he's being very like different
Yeah.
versus, more conversational. So that's one of the things I used to do a lot with my brand new officers. Like their first week, I
Yeah.
must have been like a nightmare for them because their first week, I'm like, get out, walk, like
Yeah.
talk
But
to
that
people.
that like simple thing is like so invaluable. And like
Yeah.
even, one of the things I talk about is again, like, and I was doing an Instagram live, I think the other day, and someone asked, we were talking about, getting out and making contacts and just, having conversations with strangers. Right. And I think the question was like, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you approach it? And I think someone commented like, it's just like, you're being a human being. Like just because you put a uniform on doesn't change that. Right. And the best
Yeah.
cops are realize that, I, I think some of the worst cops are the ones that think they're super cop and
Oh yeah.
they're
Yeah.
going to change the world. Some of the
Yeah.
best cops understand that they are just one small cog in the wheel, right? But you
Yeah.
can be powerful. You can make a huge impact just by being able to actually conversate with people. And
Yeah.
so again, we talk. It's like so basic, and it seems like we're talking about the some things that are so simple, yet we get them
Yeah.
so wrong.
Yeah.
But again, like back to your point too about going out, and one of the things maybe people don't realize is how difficult it is for any officer, whether we have life experience or not, to go out there and have everything that we're thinking about, knowing that, hey, at any point, like someone could pull a gun or a weapon out on us, and also be able to have that conversation. You have to develop that muscle memory of actually being able to have that conversation without having to think about it,
Yeah.
because the more you're thinking about it, if you think, a rookie comes out on their first day and they make their first traffic stop, and what's the first thing they're thinking about is like, oh shit, what do I say? And they're thinking about what's my monologue, what's my intro, and I'm thinking about my intro, so I'm getting out of the car and okay, I'm officer so and so, and this is why I pulled you over, blah blah blah. Like people don't realize that you actually have to get to a point, like you have to do it so many times that like you don't even think about that introduction.
Yeah.
And it's important. And the reason it's so important is because if you're focusing on what you're saying to someone, whether it's on a traffic stop, a subject stop, or whatever, your mental energy is towards thinking about what you're saying. Whereas
Yeah.
once you get past that and that becomes almost automatic, now what can you do? Well, then you can focus on the person's reaction to what you're saying. You can focus on the small nonverbals that you can pick up on that could perhaps lead you to believe that, hey, this person might be dangerous. They might be planning to, they might have some type of hostile intent.
Yeah.
They might be trying to conceal something. And these
Yeah.
small things that, again, happen very quickly, especially under stress.
Yeah.
We think about fight, flight, or freeze, right? When the most common indicator that someone's engaged in some type of illegal behavior, once they know that they're in the presence of law enforcement, is just that stress, those signs of stress, right? And they can be very subtle. It can be just that head snap or the wide eyes, or you I'm sure every cop's seen this, where you drive by someone, they're on the corner, or even they pass by you in a vehicle and they see you and they spot you and they're like shit, like, and you don't
Yeah.
even have to hear it, that you just mouth it, and those things happen within
Yeah.
seconds.
Yeah.
Being able to do that is so critical, because those are the things that you pick up on to then, once you become experienced with this, you can distinguish between, all right, this is actually abnormal or suspicious behavior, compared to the baseline, which is, all right, this is just normal. And if we don't teach those basics and we don't get that experience into our officers, they're going to make mistakes. And the first mistake is pulling over someone that has no suspicious nature to them. They're not engaged
Yeah.
in illegal activity. They may be displaying normal nervous behavior, as
Yeah.
anyone would when they're pulled over, but they're not displaying the behaviors that would then lead to that reasonable suspicion to keep investigating further, because you
Yeah.
think that there's actually something else going on. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, how many use of force situations do we see that turn bad because the officer kept going when they should have just said, hey, like, this is not, I don't have anything here. Like, yeah, this person might be an asshole. They might be showing
Yeah.
subtle signs of nervousness, but there's nothing that's actually leading to
Yeah.
suspiciousness.
Yeah.
Let's cut this person and move on to the next one. And if we can't
Yeah.
distinguish between actual suspicious behavior and not, again, fundamentally, we have a broken profession. And again, what police academy teaches what actual suspicious behavior is? I don't remember that. I had to learn that on the street.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, again, sometimes it's because a few reasons. One, because it's the only way you can do it is learn on the street, because you have to be able to observe that behavior. The other thing is, going back to the training piece too, which is also something to keep in mind, is who and how are we placing people in those training positions, right? In the police academy, when I went to the police academy, it was probably split down the middle. We had some officers that like, we knew that like these guys were legit. They spent 20 years in the busiest areas and they knew what they were talking about. But then you had others. And, as I went through my career, there's people that I went to the police academy with that were spent a few years on the road and then went back to teach at the academy.
Right.
And, in some cases, those were not the people you want to be teaching. And one of the problems there, one of the challenges is, at least like in my case, at no point did I ever have any interest. Now, I love training. I love teaching. However, I was not giving up what I was doing to go teach at the academy. I wasn't giving up doing the actual job for real to then go teach it because I was loving it. And so if you have these guys that like probably in a lot of police academies, unless they're forced, if they're loving the job and doing it as well as we want them to, they're probably not going to like volunteer to then just give it up and go back to the academy. So you're getting instructors in a lot of cases that probably aren't the best to be there.
Yeah.
That's a challenge to deal with. We have to, at some point it seems like the profession developed into such a complex profession, but we still pay the same and we expect the same, I guess, level of person to enter the profession. But it's extremely complex. I mean, we talk about human, we're talking about sociological things. We're talking about human psychology, human behavior. These are things that like most people in general don't understand. And now we expect police officers to understand it without teaching them how to do it and paying them very little to figure it out. On top of that, we add all the traumatic experiences and we don't help them deal with that. Well, now we have a profession where we have a lot of broken people that can't handle it and no fault of their own. We don't give them the resources to do it. And then we wonder why there's these situations that go bad when force isn't utilized correctly. Are we even teaching people the right force to use, right? These are very new concepts. People don't understand this, that like, even the explosion of martial arts over the past 30 years, like actual combatives, effective combatives really didn't even enter the law enforcement space until probably the last 5 to 10 years, maybe. Now it's getting a lot better.
I laugh about that because I've always been, I grew up in the martial arts since I was 5 years old. And what's funny to me is when I first got on the job in 2007, after, 8 years in the Army, I was told that what I learn in the martial arts are not, how was it worded? Oh, it's not certified by the state. Therefore, it's illegal for me to use. And I'm like, all right, I want you to really do an armbar takedown on me and I'll show you how ineffective it is. Like it was the funniest conversation I had with the admin, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you expect me to yell at someone to get back with my baton and what? Like try to take him into custody or what do you think? And it's and so me, I laugh at the explosion of combatives and martial arts in the law enforcement space, because to me, I'm like to me it's serious enough that it's also a joke to me. I'm like, this should have been a no-brainer.
Yeah. And we should have been we should have been ahead of it. And again, now we're at a point where a lot of, I think probably more than ever, more cops are training, but more people are training. So as the skill level of cops grows, great, the skill level of everyone grows. And now we're, in 10 years, you have kids now that are growing up in legitimate, martial arts, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, stuff like that. And they're going to be problems. I mean, you see, if you've, anyone that's followed even just the UFC over the last 30 years, like it's gone through several transformations where even the kind of what you would consider the greatest fighters of all time 20 years ago, they would get destroyed by the fighters that are coming out now, because, these kids they're starting their martial arts journey young and they're getting to a point where they're, in their early 20s and the previous generation. I mean, some of my favorite fighters, like a Matt Hughes, a Chuck Liddell, those types of guys, they wouldn't make it. They might not even make it past the prelims. And I say that with all respect, but it's just like, we're talking about that type of evolution. We have to talk about it in law enforcement because that's what we're dealing with. We don't get to if we're not at the standard, we don't just we don't just get to the standard and then like, all right, we're good. No, like what we're dealing with on the street only gets worse. It only gets more violent. It only gets more, now again with cell phones, like, and we haven't even talked about body cams, right? My agency was one of the first agencies, I think, in probably the entire country to get body cams. We got it before we were required to get them. And so I remember the first kind of generation of body cams, and people might not realize this, like they were not good. I mean, you would look at this footage and be like, I can't see shit.
Yeah.
You see one very isolated view of things. And again, like today, just the mechanics of them, it's the same thing. Like you see one picture of the entire scene. How do cops deal with that now? Luckily on one hand, it's a great training tool, right? Now we have,
Oh yeah.
how many hours of footage that we can pull up at roll call and say, hey, like, look at this. We used to have the dash cams, which are great, but like body cam is a whole different thing. It's just, it's a complex profession. We have to treat it like we have to treat ourselves as professionals. We have to treat it like the profession and treat it with the respect that it deserves. Until we do that, we're going to recruit the wrong people. We're not going to retain the right people. And we're going to deal with situations that, for better or worse, whether we could dissect every significant in custody death of the last 10 years, they're going to be all over the place, right?
Yeah.
We are always going to deal with criticism one way or another. There's always going to be situations that aren't handled correctly, but until we even get to the point where we're at least getting it right. And again, with all that said, right, out of the millions and millions of interactions that police officers have, every year, vast majority of them end with no use of force, right?
Oh yeah.
We're actually at a point where like the statistics are so minimal, it's almost silly that we're even talking about it. But back to the point, like we have to be perfect. Like that's the expectation. So we have to get as close to perfect as possible. And we only get there by ensuring that the training we're putting on is great. And, one of the things that I not necessarily learned, but I had to be kind of reminded of over the last few years was, I would kind of put some different ideas out there. And I came from a department that probably had 1,100, 1,200 officers, which I think is a pretty good size. Just it's not too big, but not too small. The problem is there's, a vast majority of the police agencies in the United States, at least, are very small. I mean, talking under 50 officers probably. Yeah. So if you think about that, like the resources, the experience they have at those departments is nothing. And so like for me, where I was fortunate, like some of the best trainings I ever went to were in-house trainings, in-house schools. A lot of agencies don't even have that. So that's why, again, it's so important to figure out how do we retain that knowledge and experience that leaves the job, keep it, make it accessible to officers, not have to charge people thousands of dollars to get a hold of that information, because the cops need it, and they need it in every region, every town, every small area. Like everything is, again, the good thing is a lot of these concepts are like very universal. Like when we talk about, assessing behavior, right? Like that's a universal thing, human psychology.
Yeah.
And if we can get that type of information in the hands of cops, the people that truly need it out there in the world, we'll be doing better. But again, like there's no easy answer to it. I think we can all just try to do our part. And unfortunately, and it's another thing that I post a lot about is unfortunately, as with every walk of life or profession, there's going to be people that fall below the standard, whether they choose to or they're just incapable. There's a reason it's called average, is because some people are going to be below it and some people are going to be above it. And we can't lower the standard for the people that can't meet it. We have to keep the standard high. And whether that means that we just are highly critical of those who we hire and get through the academy and get through field training, like that's what it has to be. We have to live up to a higher standard, or the standard is just always going to be behind the curve.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this, but I know like in my neck of the woods, the PT standards have changed or are getting ready to change or whatever they're doing, and they're even like they've gotten rid of sit-ups because people can't do sit-ups, so now they have them do planks. And I think I don't know if this is actually happening, but there is word of getting rid of like the 1.5 mile run, and I'm like, what are they doing? I said, I was like, again, when I got on the job, I mean, the standards were pretty high to get on the like, you had to work to get on the job. And I'm like, now you're gonna hire what the slob that's never done anything in their entire life. Now you're gonna put a badge and gun in their hand. They're not gonna. They wouldn't even pass the academy based on their, the level of fitness they're at right now. And to me, I remember when I first went to the academy, and the DIs there were all Marines, all veterans and combat veterans. And, you know, we had a few drop out, obviously, but, their thing was like, day one is the shark attack and all that
Yeah.
shit. But it's like, they were like, you'd better be in shape when you get here.
Yeah.
We're not going to make you get in shape. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have time to do that, which is
Yeah.
true because there's a lot of shit crammed into that 6-month academy that they need to
Yeah.
get through, and they can't be dealing with someone who can't run.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the way I've always taken it is, and I completely agree with you. Lowering the standard is only going to make the job worse, not
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
And doing that, you're setting up the agencies for failure.
Yeah.
Because I mean, these days, never mind trying to get cops hired, we're like going out of town, out of state. Like no one's taking the
Yeah.
job, and the ones who are taking the job, you really don't want them to take the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really such a weird time right now, and I don't
Yeah.
think the general public really realizes
Yeah.
what's been going on. And
Yeah.
and
I mean, this.
again, I put it on the admin to actually
Mhm.
talk about it.
Yeah. There's so many nuances, I think, especially when we hear the opinions of either anyone outside of the profession. Like, again, we were just talking about how it's important for young officers to just be comfortable with like talking to somebody, so then they can put their focus on like just observing them. Right. Same thing with fitness. Like if someone's not in the physical shape they need to be in, now their focus is on that. Now their focus is on one. Again, if you're not in physical shape aren't and you aren't lacking in confidence, then there's probably a problem, because that means then now you think you can do more than you actually can. But if
They'll say my adrenaline will help me. I'm like, no, that's not
right,
the way
yeah,
adrenaline works.
yeah, that's something like someone that's never been in an actual fight will say, right? Like,
Exactly.
and again, like the good thing is now you can go to any BJJ gym in America and spend 60 seconds underneath a black belt, and you'll have your world turned upside down. You'll understand,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Which is what we need. But if we're focused on like, hey, like I'm not even sure if like I'm just coming up to a car and you see a guy that's like seriously jacked, and you're like, oh shit, I don't even know what I'm going to do with this guy.
Yeah.
Now everything in your mind has now focused in on that, where now you can't even focus on all the other things. And if we can't get those fundamentals right, like you're saying, like we're hiring people that aren't even in shape, we're putting them in a situation that they're not going to win, because everything that they have to focus on prevents them to then focus on the things like decision making and good judgment, to where we can't even get to that point. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of when we see a lot of the opinions on law enforcement and what's required, or who we should be hiring, it's just a complete disconnect on the nuance of the job, and even those small things that we just expect people. And I mean, here's a good point, right? And it's not even a topic we got into yet, maybe on like another episode. But when we think about like active assailant, active shooter situations, right? I do quite a bit of active shooter training for civilians, for the corporate world, and the no vice level of understanding of situation like that would probably stun people, right? But look at the world as human beings. Our level of situational awareness is about nothing. It's about zero, right? In general. Whereas cops, we have to be situationally aware, right? And if as police officers we're not situationally aware, we can get hurt, we can get killed, we can get other people hurt or killed. But that disconnect, where it goes to the old adage, like, you ever heard someone like, well, why didn't you just shoot him in the leg? Well, that comes from a complete, that's just from a space of so much ignorance that it's almost not even worth having the conversation, because they're not even at base level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't understand how wrong and how like how inaccurate that idea even is.
Yeah.
So we have to, as a profession, like we have to teach the public of like, hey, like, the reason I don't shoot the person in the leg is because of this, obviously. Or the reason that we need officers that are fit is because if they're focused on, questioning themselves whether or not they can handle this subject, like they're going to make decisions based on that thought, right? Like, even the case of, you pull someone over and they have a warrant. I'm just using it as like a hypothetical.
Yeah.
You pull them over and they have a warrant, and they're like jacked, and like, if I go to pull this guy out of the car, it's going to be an all-on fight, and I'm probably going to lose. is that like that goes through your decision making, whether or not it's conscious or not. So, obviously we need to have good guys that are capable of dealing with bad guys. But the conversation, like we have to own the conversation and teach the public. And again, that starts from the top, right? That's when you
Yep.
see these leaders that just like they throw their officers under the bus, and it's completely ridiculous when we haven't even explained to the public why we did certain things.
Yeah.
It's and if you're going to get into this job too, you have to be prepared to live up to the standard. you know Back to kind of my point, which I kind of lost my train of thought there, but the public does not, police officers would probably be stunned at the level of ignorance the public has in terms of what they do and why they do it.
Yeah, no, that's 100%.
It's just, when they see responses to certain things, and again, when we do them right, we have to explain why we did certain things. When we do them wrong, then we have to even double explain like what
Yeah,
was supposed
yeah,
to be done and why we didn't do it, right?
yeah, yeah,
We have to own that conversation. But again, like we also have to, own the conversation of, all right, if we put a physically unfit person on the road, or we put someone, allow them to become physically unfit and put them in a position to have to apprehend someone, well, things are not going to go right. Like if luck is not on their side, someone's going to get hurt simply because they're not in the physical shape or have the capacity to deal with that person. And then what do they resort to? They resort to things that probably aren't the best techniques. And
yeah,
so we're putting people in a position to fail from the beginning. And until we start there,
yeah.
the conversation is going to continue to the point where we're making bad choices and we don't really have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, all the, like I think when me and you first on, we could talk about this for hours. So
Yeah.
it's like there's definitely a lot for us to dissect through these conversations, and it's kind of like like I told you, it kind of takes it on us to amplify that voice,
Yeah.
to talk about these things and make sure people really know and understand what this profession is. It's not just a
Right.
job; it's a profession. You need to have this holistic approach when it comes to training.
Yep.
And without taking more of your time, I know you got a hard stop coming up, and we'll end the show in a minute. But if there is one thing you want to tell officers tonight, for today, or even the public today, if there's one thing you want to tell them, what would that be?
Take the job seriously. Don't take yourself so seriously. Have humility. Understand that, again, the job will go on when you're gone, when I'm gone, when everyone's gone, it'll keep going. The day you retire, the next day your spot will be filled, right? And just understand that, because once you accept that, I hope that gives people a little bit of just peace of mind and understanding, like it's not up to every single one of us to like change the world. It's not going to happen, and that's okay. But you can make a huge impact on your neighborhood, your community, your agency, by just living up to the standard that you want to set for yourself and for the people around you. Again, don't take yourself so seriously, because we're all going to make mistakes. We can only live up to the standard that we set and that we strive for. But the job must be taken seriously, and that's part of that. If you take, you have to take the job seriously, because that's the only way you're going to be motivated to live up to that standard.
Yeah.
And just again, everyone has to have some level of autonomy and themselves and personal sovereignty. Take some pride in yourself, in your job, in your reputation, in your day to day. Be prideful in just putting the uniform on and wearing it the way it should be worn, and going out there and mastering the basics. Like those things matter. And when you leave the job, whether it's in 5, 25, 35 years, like, I would hope that everyone that gets through this career looks back and is proud of what they accomplished. And if you're kind of sitting around not doing anything, you're kind of floundering, just think about that. Like, think about what you want to do in 10, 15 years. And do you want to look back and be proud of the work you did, the cases you worked, the bad guys you took off the street? Or you just want to, look back and see that you tried to sit in a parking lot all day? Like, there's other things you can do with similar or better money and a lot less stress. So if you're going to do the job, just do it correctly, because I think if you don't, a lot of people will get out of this profession and just kind of have a somber feeling about it when they look back. But yeah, just, take it seriously, have some humility, and just have a standard and live up to it.
Yeah. What a great way to end, man. I've always been the type to say, and this comes back from my commander when I was in Iraq. I'm my battalion commander, and he always said, and this is us young 20, 21-year-olds, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and he would say to us, during battalion meetings, his uplifting talks with us, he would tell us, like, what legacy are you going to leave behind? What are you going to want to be remembered for? What are you going to look back? And when you're 60 years old, you're going to look back on your time and think it was a waste, or you actually had a positive impact. So, man, that's a great way to end it, JT. If you want to hang out for a minute, I'm just going to do a quick outro, and we'll talk offline real quick.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, man, what a great episode. I hope everyone enjoys it. I hope everyone really takes to heart what JT just said there, and even throughout the entire episode. Make sure you follow him on Instagram. I'll put up all the show notes for you guys to go and follow and share all the stuff, because it's really, really important stuff. In the meantime, stay safe, stay sapient.